Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Barriers to Indigenous Recruitment. This is the third in a series of 3 webinars that my colleague Brad Spence has hosted for us all around Indigenous awareness. So the first webinar was a general overview of Indigenous awareness. We had cultural sensitivity training last month, and this is the third in the series. So if you missed any of the previous webinars and you'd like to catch up or you'd like to share, they're available on the Eco Canada website for free, www.eco.ca. My name's Hannah Williamson. I'm the Training and Events Coordinator here at Eco Canada, and today I'm going to be moderating the webinar to make sure we can all enjoy and participate effectively. I just have a few housekeeping points I'll run through before handing over to Brad. First of all, everyone on the line, all of our participants are muted. So if you're having any difficulties, please check your audio settings, and you can send a message to us through questions to staff in the chat box, and we'll do everything we can to try and resolve any audio issues quickly. If you do experience any cutting out, any of the audio dropping, one thing I will recommend straight away is try leaving the call and rejoining, and that tends to fix about 99% of all issues that we have. Questions are encouraged as well. You can use that same chat box and select questions to staff at any point in the presentation, and we're going to have a dedicated time at the end to put those questions to Brad. If we don't have time to get through all of your questions, we tend to have quite a few questions in these Indigenous webinars. Don't worry, we'll take those offline and get you an answer afterwards. Today's session is being recorded, so you'll be sent an email straight after the session ends with a link to the recording. And you'll also be sent a link to our survey too. So we'd just love it if you could take a couple of minutes to let us know what you thought about today's session, anything you'd like to see in terms of topics for future sessions, or anything that we can do to improve your webinar experience. Today's session is brought to you by Eco Canada. Eco is the steward for the Canadian environmental workforce across all industries and sectors. Everything that we do, all of our programs and services are geared towards you, the environmental professionals and the environmental employers who make up Canada's environmental sector. We not only train and certify, but we also have our own in-house research team who assess the Canadian environmental market and identify any gaps and challenges. And that research helps us to tailor our programs and services to make sure that they are really applicable to you, environmental professionals. Everything that we do at Eco Canada is geared towards driving sustainable economic growth and ensuring that environmental best care and practice is always a priority in everything that we do. I'm now going to hand over to Brad, who is our guest speaker today. Brad is the Indigenous and Communities Relations Specialist here at Eco Canada. He's a proud member of the Saddle Lake First Nation, and Brad has over 15 years experience in Indigenous and stakeholder relations for both not-for-profit and oil and gas sectors. Welcome, Brad. I'm so excited to hear your presentation, and I hope everybody enjoys.
Okay, Tanatara Ambawastich Tansei. Welcome everyone to the third installment of our Indigenous webinar series. Thank you for joining me on the last two. If you joined, welcome. If you are new to our webinar series, I hope you have a pleasant experience. And if you have any questions, we'll be taking questions at the end of this session. For those that are new, I humbly ask, it is within our culture that we acknowledge our Creator today. We give thanks for bringing us all together, for us being here healthy, happy. And I always start off every webinar with a quick prayer. So either please pray along with me or just please respectfully give me just a minute or two just so I could start things off with an opening blessing or prayer. So please pray. Thank you for allowing me to do that. My name is Brad Spence. I do have over 15 years of stakeholder relations, Indigenous relations engagement. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. I really have a lot of experience and hopefully a lot of knowledge I could share with you. This is my opinions and through my experiences that I am sharing with you that I have found to be the top barriers of to Indigenous recruitment, and it just brings an Indigenous perspective. So on today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the traditional land acknowledgement, bringing a global and national framework into Indigenous recruitment, bring the Indigenous and a company perspective to barriers to recruitment. And then I'm going to talk to the barriers. What specifically are the barriers to recruitment? But when we also talk about barriers to recruitment, we have to understand there's the whole recruitment process. Everything from recruitment resources to interviews to onboarding, retention, exit interviews. What are the best practices that a company or organization can do? And I'm going to try to bring that Indigenous perspective to that. And like I said, we'll have the question period at the end of today's topic. So first off, we always start off by acknowledging our land acknowledgement. What an honor, privilege it is to live and work within the Treaty 7 territory here. Eco-Canada acknowledges the traditional territories and oral practices of the Niitsitapi or the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika Nation, the Piikani Nation, and the Kainai or Gaina First Nation. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and the Eehe Nakota or Stony Nakota First Nations, which includes the Chiniki, Wesley, and Bearspaw First Nations. In addition to that, the City of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region Zone 3. So we'd like to acknowledge that we're on their traditional lands right now. To start off, I want to bring in a global perspective. It is in Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that everyone has a right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Everyone, without any discrimination, has a right to equal pay and equal work. And for the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it clearly states that Indigenous peoples have the right without discrimination to improvement of their economic and social conditions, including inter alia in these areas of education, employment, vocational training and retraining, housing, sanitation, health, and social security. So again, these are our fundamental rights on a global perspective. On a national perspective, we bring in the Employment Equity Act. The Employment Equity Act requires employers to identify and remove barriers to employment, institute positive policies and practices, and make reasonable accommodations to achieve representation of Aboriginal peoples in the employer's workforce. When we start talking about the Employment Equity Act, we're also talking about diversity and inclusion. We all understand the benefits of the diversity and inclusion. We get that through our organizational programs, our policies and practices, and through our employees or our work colleagues. I just wanted to quickly talk about the diversity in Canada, how they see the diversity in the workspace. And as you can see, it is all encompassing. It covers everything from the national and international content to technology, legislation, demographics, official languages, economy, national values, and then of course reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And it brings it into those human rights, the socioeconomic context, and the employment context. So when we start talking employment, I'm going to talk about the Indigenous perspective first when we start talking employment. People that are non-Indigenous, Western society, we would encourage people first to learn something about us, if it's our culture, our way of life, our spirituality, have an understanding of it, of us, because you would really know who we are as Indigenous people. And that's what I want to quickly talk about now, is that Indigenous people, the number one value for us is life. We're non-materialistic. Life is the most precious thing to us. And that life that we live is a gift from the Creator. Our life, our values are shared with our family. So we are very strongly family focused and orientated. Everything we do culturally, everything we do spiritually is either through our family and our community. Our community is an extension of our family. Chiyushpai, or an extended family, is still included in that family. I personally am adopted on about 20 different reserves throughout North America. I have an extended family of about 3,000 to 5,000 people. If I have lost someone, and I've lost 3 fathers, or 2, all 3 adopted so far, you might not understand, why is this guy going to so many funerals for the same father over and over? Well, it's not the same father. I have adopted fathers throughout North America, or someone who's taken me as a son. That's that extended family. We are heavily family and community focused, and that comes back to the value of life. Now, we are people from the land, and that's our cultural identity. We have our own spirituality, our culture, which is really land-based, Mother Earth, star people. It's all encompassing of this world, this universe. But we get our wood, our water, our rocks, our medicines, everything from the land, our way of life. We hunted, we gathered, we trapped, we fished. Mother Earth provides us everything. We also have our own languages, if it's Cree, Blackfoot, Sioux, Soto, Dene, Ojibwe, whatever it may be. Each one of those languages are sacred to us. But we get our cultural identity of being Indigenous through all 3 of those components. Land, language, and culture makes us who we are. And we are very self-conscious as Indigenous people to be hired for tokenisms or diversity quotas. And what I mean by that is a perfect example is up in the oil sands, a lot of companies used quotas to meet some of the fundamental recruitment numbers that they were looking to do within their agreements. So a lot of us as Indigenous people, are we just being hired for show, for a presentation, as tokenism, or is it a true commitment between the company and organization and us as Indigenous people? We're very well aware that quotas exist in certain aspects, either oil and gas or forestry or oceanography, whatever it may be. We understand that those quotas exist in certain areas, but we're very self-conscious. And this comes back, and we'll be talking about this further in depth when we talk about the barriers. Now, again, as Indigenous people, we're very non-homogeneous. We're very diverse. We all have different various levels of education and qualifications and skill sets. And we have a very entrepreneurial spirit. We're really driven when we have that commitment that opportunity. We're very entrepreneurial driven. So that's just a little bit what we look at our Indigenous perspective when we start talking employment overall. Again, going back to the education, we understand that there's a lot of us, doctors, lawyers, whatever it may be, whatever profession, have high levels of education. Due to some of our remote communities, we might not have the opportunity to go to post-secondary institutions or even reaching high school. That could be a challenge for some of those. So again, we'll talk about that further in detail when we start talking the barrier specific. But at a company or industry perspective, I want to bring up the #1 challenge for recruitment that I have found is that companies, organizations have a hard time finding qualified candidates for that position. Most companies either lack or hopefully have developed a clear policy or program and plan that really has a strategy laid out for Indigenous recruitment and retention. Again, we'll be talking about the whole cycle when we talk about recruitment and barriers to employment. There's cycles to follow, and these plans and processes have to cover that whole cycle or that whole process. Cultural insensitivity, again, that is one of the barriers that we will be talking about, but it is the company's, industry's perspective is that we have to make people feel welcome and adaptable. We have to be cultural considerate. We can no longer be culturally insensitive. And that happens by developing an internal cross-cultural inclusion training programs for our employees. Even if it's an Indigenous 101 perspective, it could be a topic about residential schools, it could be a topic about barriers to recruitment. But there has to be some type of cross-cultural training happening within organizations. And there has to be something implemented about Indigenous programs. This could range from a Indigenous mentorship program all the way to career development programs or champion programs, where we're working, have a process for our Indigenous employees to grow up that corporate ladder. We have to focus, our companies and industries have to focus on longer term career development, not just entry-level positions or with a ceiling. This is a job versus a career. And a perfect example of this I want to talk to quickly about. Because I come from the oil and gas sector, I have a lot of experience with oil sands projects. Pearl Oil Sands was my baby, one of my projects that I was managing over. And we had, at the time, 12 prime contractors. And those prime contractors are there to do the work to build everything to get to the operations. Those contractors are there to build a project. They would try to do their best efforts and commit to those relationship buildings to hire Indigenous recruitment. But honestly, what I found through that experience is that they're there just to build their job, do what they have to do, and it's on to the next project that they get, the next contract awarded. For Indigenous people, that's the job. We go from project to project, if it's CNRL, if it's curl, if it's thing, we're building these little projects and scopes. But every time we go through that, we're having to reprove ourselves, retrain to this new project, and they're capped off at a certain ceiling. people or the developers, such as the Syncrudes, Imperial Oils, the Huskies, the CNRLs, they're the developers. They're the ones there that are operating those sites for 40, 45 years plus. They're the ones that are owning those relationships with the local Indigenous communities. Those are the careers that people are looking for long term. If it's a trade such as a journeyman scaffolder or a journeyman welder to a plant process operator, whatever those types of positions are, the Indigenous people are very well aware what the difference is and what the benefits are between a job versus a career. And I just wanted to bring this forward to show that company or industry perspective is to know and acknowledge that we understand the differences between those. The recruitment is different than typical Western approach. A lot of people use Indeed, other job shops, referrals. I'm going to be talking about recruitment resources further on, but just to acknowledge, you might have to think outside that corporate box. We might have to take a different approach and not just, it's not a one approach fits all approach. But fundamentally, any recruitment starts with building relationships. And building relationships is key. I'll be talking about this further in depth again when we start talking those barriers. When we start talking those building relationships, this is exactly what I was meaning, is partnering with the community, key people on reserves or nations, communities, education, employment, training departments. Those are those types of relationships you have to build. But you cannot build those relationships without being authentic. Being authentic is being true to yourself, true to your organization, communicating what those organization and company values are, and being true to them. That's how you build those relationships, and that's being authentic, being genuine. But when we start talking recruitment, it's also time to start talking about systemic barriers that prevent these inclusive employee experiences. Let's create a workplace that everyone can be proud of. Now, we all know systemic barriers are man-made, but I just wanted to highlight just some statistics that really show how embedded some of these systemic barriers are. Discrimination is alive and well, as we know, unfortunately. Even at a higher numeracy and literacy skill levels for First Nation people still have a significantly lower probability of employment at 75%, Métis at 87%, and non-Indigenous people at 90%. So I just want you to be aware that those systemic barriers exist, and it is our duties as employees, corporations, organizations, we're trying to break those systemic barriers, especially when it comes to barriers to Indigenous recruitment. So now let's get into the actual barriers to Indigenous recruitment. What are they? And I could tell you the number one barrier to Indigenous recruitment is trust. Indigenous people have a hard time trusting other people, especially non-Indigenous, either organizations, companies, governments. We have been lied to. Hopefully, if you saw the last couple webinars, you know that's like through the atrocities such as residential school or 60 school or Indian Act. We know that these are the causes, the root causes for Indigenous people to trust other people, other companies. What we're asking you as an organization or a company, when you start thinking of barriers to recruitment, is to start looking at taking a two-eyed seeing or a two-way engagement approach. For Indigenous people, like I said, we talked about quotas, we talked about a career versus a job. And this is, those two systems right there help fuel that distrust. When we're talking barriers to Indigenous employment, that trust a lot of the times gets broken. If I get hired on or someone gets hired on, they try to do their best that they can. If they come up with an issue, a perfect example is when that Indigenous person brings that issue to light, it is easier for the company or the organization to let that person go than to fix the problem. And again, that's where it comes into building, keeping, earning that trust. And really this falls into one word, and it's just being respectful. If you are respectful, if you are authentic, if you are honest in building that relationship, if you are truly representative and proud of your organization and the values that aligns with it, you're portraying that and you're building that trust with Indigenous people or whoever you may be recruiting, if it's myself or whoever. So trust is the biggest barrier to Indigenous employment. Just understanding that, trying to earn and build someone's trust right away through nurturing that relationship, through building those partnerships, or through having that contact with Indigenous people. You have to understand that perspective, that we have to learn to trust that company organization, and you have to learn and build that trust with us. And that's reciprocated. Trust is something you have to earn and learn. Now, the number two, or what I find in the top barriers to recruitment, is cultural insensitivity. And we reach cultural insensitivity through ethnocentrism, egocentrism, stereotypes, prejudices, fear, and a lack of knowledge and education. We strive to be a culturally sensitive person, a culturally sensitive community, a culturally sensitive organization or company. But if you do not have that understanding, the basic understanding or knowledge of culture, of people, the diversity of people, if you do not have the cultural sensitivity, you will not have that trust to breaking down that barrier to barriers to employment. So culturally insensitivity is huge. Our egos, our approach to recruitment from our own perspectives, it's really not truly valuing that diversity aspect. And going in with preconceived ideas and biases, that's where we get into really limiting our company and your employees or Indigenous peoples. A perfect example of that, I have a friend who speaks Cree fully. I was honored to be his manager, supervisor. He was a heavy equipment operator, and he was probably one of the top 3 heavy equipment operators in the oil sands of Alberta. And he was so good at his job, the company that we worked for refused to promote him, to make him management, to train him, like further career development, because, quote, they said, he's too valuable to us in that position. Again, that comes back to earning the trust of that person, that individual. That's that individual's perspective on the company, the organization. And we have to learn to be culturally sensitive and break down this cultural insensitivity as a barrier to recruitment. We all know through the Indigenous 101 training and even some of the cultural sensitivity training, as I said, Indigenous people are very diverse, and a lot of us have a wide variety of education. But one of the barriers to recruitment is having a lack of education or training credentials. And again, that could come from different aspects, if it's through colonialism, if it's through our residential school experiences. It could be just our land location or having the opportunity to get to school. It's understanding how post-secondary funding works on reserves, and then trying to go through that process. So all of these things play aspect, but lack of education training credentials is definitely a huge barrier to Indigenous recruitment. And lack of high school or post-secondary education, we understand that I just said that there is a funding process even for Indigenous people to go to post-secondary education. Some communities may not even have a driver's registry department to go take a driver's license in their community. So having a lack of driver's license or keeping it valid. Literature, English as a second language. My friend that I just talked about earlier, he had to repeat everything I said at the very beginning. It wasn't because he didn't understand it. He wanted the clear, precise direction so he could translate from Cree to English. So this is what you want me to do. This is what you want me to do. Okay, I'll do that. And he will go off. And like I said, he was probably one of the top 3 operators in all the oil sands. So understanding that literature, experiential learning, those opportunities, we might not have some of the life skills to even start. A lot of the first time jobs, opportunities for young or youth coming out of our First Nation community, say around the oil sands. So Fort Chippewa's a perfect example. Their 18-year-olds first time getting a job would be to a oil sand camp of about 10,000 people. That's pretty intimidating. But do they even have that social life skills or physical skills for their first time job? You're taking them from a small remote community going into a very predominant active workspace and environment. Do they even have that skill set? And this is where that lack of education training comes in. And an interesting point that I always bring up is the traditional knowledge. Is this being recognized and valued by the recruiters? What role does traditional knowledge play in employment? So what is the traditional knowledge versus the Western approach to education and experiences? So this is a huge barrier as well. With that barrier of lack of education skill set really goes in and intertwines, interrelates with job readiness. If it's through, do we, as Indigenous people, do we have those adaptation skills? Do we have the complex thinking skills? Do we have the critical thinking skills? Do we have a personal branding? Do we know how to sell ourselves, starting with our resume? Do we have a resume portfolio? Do we have an interview job skill set? When we're 18 in this remote communities, do we have this type of career readiness. And this ties in to that lack of education or lack of skill sets. So another barrier to employment is transportation. Many people do not possess a valid driver's license, and transportation can be a barrier. Funds to pay the licensing fees could be a barrier. Proximity to those testing facilities could be a barrier. A lot of remote communities only have 1 or 2 stop signs, no highways, no testing facilities. So a lot of these communities, their transportation are quads and they don't have a valid driver's license. A lot of the remote communities are serviced by public transit. Insurance is expensive and out of reach for many in pre-employment situations. So as a recruiter or an organization, we have to be understanding, flexible, patient. Perhaps we could be flexible on our work hours. If a person is having troubles coming into work and they're late several times, we know that there's normally a 1, 2, 3 strikes system in your release, let go. Perhaps maybe understanding this barrier, we could become more flexible on it. This could also give and promote possible remote work opportunities. It could stipend transportation allowance, perhaps. We could possibly create like rideshare programs. And we just have to be adaptive and considerate to this transportation barrier, especially for small town or small communities or small reserves. Now, poverty, poor housing. Many First Nation children living on reserve start each day in overcrowded, inadequate homes. Now, these pictures are a stark contrast. Yes, there are some reserves with third world housing, just like that bottom picture. A lot of people, not to say, first of all homes are like that on the reserve. There are some very beautiful homes on the reserve, but that is a truth and reality. On some reserves, the housing conditions are like that. On the top picture, there's a lot of Indigenous people living in cities or rural communities, but poverty and poor housing is definitely a barrier to employment. It's not uncommon to have many families living in a house, one house. My late brother's house, he has a family of 21 people living in one home. For a long time was definitely a challenge. You're possibly not getting enough sleep, finding a quiet place to sleep. If you're living inside the city, you could have 4 or 5 families living together to pay the huge mortgages, as we all know, and the bills. The cost of living to live in a city is huge. So if there's multiple people, multiple families living in one house, that brings on different challenges and impacts. Someone might not have the finances to bring a lunch to work with 20 people in the house. So they could be possibly malnourished. They might not have that same energy compared to other workers that are eating well every day. The housing conditions, like I said, the person might be deprived of sleep one night. With 20 people, I'm sure that there's every family has arguments, and sometimes things could possibly escalate. Again, that stress, those challenges follow us into our work. We try not to let it affect our work, but as an employer, as an organization or an Indigenous recruiter, we have to be cognizant of these challenges and the impacts that could have on possibly our punctuality or the performance. We have to be understanding and adaptable. And just to note, just what I said before, there is not always a one-size-fits-all approach or solution to this. Same thing with childcare. Childcare is a huge issue right across the nation, especially on the reserves. Same types of challenges. As a recruiter, we just what I said, we have to be adaptive and considerate. We may have to be flexible on our work hours, or possibly, again, flexible on remote work opportunities. It is important to note not every barrier is the responsibility of the recruiter or the organization or the company to overcome. Just recognize these barriers, be adaptable, and make concessions where able. We understand that there's cultural differences as barriers. And just what I was saying, as an Indigenous recruiter, having some knowledge of taking an Indigenous 101 training will help break down those cultural differences right at the bat, or right at the start. So racism and stereotypes, one of the fundamental barriers to Indigenous peoples securing, maintaining employment. This directly relates to the attitudes passed down since European settlers arrived in North America. We're all trying to stop racism. We're trying to break down those systemic barriers. We're trying to alleviate those or eliminate those stereotypes. As a recruiter, these are just some of the things that we could possibly be doing. And it could incorporate either in having an indigenous ombudsman brought on board, or a role that within the HR or supports the HR. And this could be a perfect example of what I am doing now with Eco Canada. I am trying to share my knowledge, wisdom, expertise within Indigenous relations, and I'm supporting that across the nation, but I'm also supporting it across Canada through our Eco Canada partners, our relationships. I'm trying to share that wisdom to break down racism and stereotypes and just create some cultural diversity and sensitivity training. So, and the other thing to think of when we're talking about this is how are you incorporating UNDRIP, TRC, and the social development goals into your policies, into your recruitment policies. Now, technology, we take it for granted, especially living here in the city, that Wi-Fi is so easy. We live off our phones, we live off this technology, but a lot of our Indigenous communities may not have access to reliable internet. A lot of the communities may have internet, but it's questionable at best. Some of them don't even have access to internet. Some have the capability where they could have and operate smartphones within their communities and other forms of technologies. A lot of communities, especially up north, are still operating on faxes and landlines. With technology, you also have to have the technological skills and familiarity that comes with that. So as a recruiter or as an organization or a company, these are just some of the suggestions. Could you provide reasonable access to some of the equipment, either computer, laptop, screens, whatever that may be, air cards for internet? Supplement deficiency skills with upgrading training. And again, this might be a perfect opportunity to work from home opportunities or remote work opportunities. So now we're going to talk about recruitment resources. Those were the main barriers to Indigenous recruitment. But let's start talking now where to recruit from, how to recruit. excuse me, getting a little dry. So current employees, current people that you, Indigenous people that you already have an existing relationship with, are your best source to find other Indigenous employees. And if you do not communicate to your Indigenous employees as often as you should, this is something a company or organization could look at doing to support that Indigenous recruitment. Now, a lot of communities, reserves, Métis settlements, we all have a version or someplace that would be considered a community employment center. At the band office, the band office might focus on the nation employment opportunities, but the local employment center focuses on working with the members of the community or the nation or the settlement to provide those employment opportunities to help with job search, to help with resume building, to help with interview skill sets, any other training necessary. So as an organization, as a company, I would start looking at building those relationships with those local community employment centers. A perfect example of an asset holder or a community assets holder is here in Calgary, we have Community Futures. It is where all Treaty 7 communities, so just what we said in the land acknowledgement, the Sutana, the Stoney Nakoda, the Blackfoot Confederacy, this is our asset holder for the urban area for the Aboriginal skills and employment training strategy that they all support. So this would be another place where Indigenous people will go to looking for jobs, training, employment and recruitment support. So again, this would be another fantastic venue for you as an organization or company to build that relationship with. Online, a lot of people, as you know, especially during this COVID time, is turning to online programming. Perfect example of this would be a Indigenous job fair, such as Inclusion Works. I believe a lot of people, especially our youth, are really focusing on this online aspect. So I would be monitoring those online activities such as career fairs, job fairs, networking sessions, whatever that may be. I would build a relationship with the local friendship center, although they're not specific to resume building or employment development skills. What the local friendship centers are great for, a lot of the companies, organizations, if they have a project or if they're looking for recruitment, there's a lot of job boards and job postings going up within friendship centers. And again, this is what I said at the very beginning, if you already have a relationship with the either existing Indigenous peoples, Indigenous employees, those are your best venue to network or best venue for recruitment, because they can share with their friends. They know so many people, and that's what the friendship centers are great for networking those job opportunities around. And if it's a smaller community, if it's out in a remote area, they might not have the employment center, so check to see if they have a local community hall. Again, it would be a great place for job postings, for local recruitment. The other place that I really encourage recruiters, companies, organizations that are looking to recruit, build those relationships with the local Indigenous student centers at the post-secondary institutions. Here in Calgary, we have the Niskim centers. At the universities, we have a Aboriginal or Native Student Center in every post-secondary institution here around Calgary. If you are looking for recruitment, especially for fresh graduates, which is great for internships and co-ops, start building those relationships with those Indigenous centers. That way you can possibly post your opportunities there as well. And again, with everything going online, I really strongly encourage everyone to check that social media, LinkedIn, really keep that Indigenous focus. I did leave out the Canada, government of Canada, like their national employment centers, but this is the Indigenous perspective of where we go and where you could go to support or to find, help support you with your local Indigenous recruitment. So some recruitment best practices is to have a voluntary self-declaration system in place for Indigenous employees, have buy-in from the top. It really starts at the top. If your manager's committed to Indigenous recruitment, it will filter down from the top. But no matter who it is, someone has to own it. And it's not a co-op intern every 2-3 months, that position changing. Someone has to be sincere and own Indigenous recruitment. Partnerships with other Indigenous organizations, have best practice of executive champions for Indigenous issues and outreach at educational employment events. So just what I was saying, either having an Indigenous ombudsman or a designated person to help build these partnerships. Developing recruitment assets targeted at Inuit, First Nation, and Métis potential recruits, using Indigenous media and social media for a recruitment drive. So just what I was saying about online practices, if your organization, you as a recruiter, develop that as well, you'd have a lot better chances or a lot better success within your recruitment. And make use of Indigenous specific job boards and partnering with educational and training institutions to provide direct pathway jobs for Indigenous peoples in occupations departments with which they are underrepresented. A perfect example I want to state is that people or oil sands, again in particular, people get locked into the top 3 positions and they don't even become aware that other career opportunities or job positions are there. They just get so forced or stuck into the top 3 positions, which are heavy equipment operator, plant process operator, and laborer. Those were the top 3 in the oil sands. And if you have a safety or an environmental position, we have to keep getting that awareness out there that these jobs exist. So you make use of those Indigenous specific job boards. Now, when we start talking about those recruitment sources, we have to talk about that full process. I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try speed this up a little bit. But on the interviews, these are some of the key components of the interviews. Again, lack of trust. If we're not sure, we're uncomfortable, we're intimidated, make the interview personal, get to know us, who we are, who our family is, what our community is about, our culture, our history. Allow time for that storytelling or relationship building. And eye contact, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, those who took the first 2 webinars of the series may understand, again, through residential school experiences, we might not have the eye contact. We'll put our heads down, shy away, look away, either for intimidation, fear, again, lack of trust. So just know that exists, but again, be mindful to it. So again, first impressions are everything. If it's either at the interview stage or if we get to the onboarding stage. What I really wanted to reiterate here is, as an Indigenous recruiter, success defines success. Success starts with success. Define success. This story comes from David Boucher, Holly Fortier, who is another Indigenous awareness consultant. That's her uncle. We did this together for many years. But that success story defines success. If it's career, if it's health, if it's wealth, if it's family, if it's money, whatever it may be, you define success. But I believe and I can guarantee that someone in your lifetime gave you an opportunity for you to be successful. It could be your first job, it could be your mentor, it could be your instructor. Somebody believed in you. Who is that going to be for the next generation? And that's what I always tell people. Success defines success. Who's it going to be for the next generation? As an Indigenous recruiter, you could be that opportunity. Again, retention through the whole process. Someone has to own it. Management has to be committed to it. Exit interviews. These are fantastic ways to learn about your company's organization, assessments of your organization's environment and culture. Get a true level of commitment and assessment from it. So, and again, this is a great opportunity for finding out why they left and possibly review continuing obligations like a Privacy Act moving forward. So I'm saying all of this because with that recruitment, this comes back to reconciliation efforts. And in 2008, the Truth Reconciliation Commission in Canada was created. The mandate was to inform auditors about the truth about the impacts of residential school systems and to guide and inspire Canadians and other peoples of the world in a process of renewed relationship and reconciliation. So as a recruiter, as a company, as an organization, what are you doing to adopt and implement the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, and your TRC, especially called Action Section 92? And these are just some of the best practices. I'm just going to quickly go over a few of these. But does your company have a real commitment to Indigenous recruitment? Do you have an Indigenous ombudsman or a designated representative that could, like I said, support HR or just be that person to go to create that awareness and training? Do you have an Indigenous relations policy? Do you have a cultural space or multicultural room where your diverse culture of employees could go and pray or to smudge or to start their day or whatever they do? Do they have that gathering place? Do you have cultural diversity and sensitivity training in place? Do you have an Indigenous employee network? Do you have Indigenous mentorship programs? Do you have that Indigenous interviewers adaptive approach? These are just some more of these best practices. I'll be glad to share them and present or talk further on these, either one-on-one or if you have any questions about what other best practices that you may have. But these are just some of the innovative ideas that I have seen around or that I have experienced. I just wanted to recap, recognize the value of diversity of skills, background, experiences, culture, and other that bring to your work. Embrace it. So again, I know I raced through the last two slides, but they are all, the last three slides are really some of the best practices and innovative ideas that I've seen out there. Cultural days is a perfect example. Recognize that some Indigenous employees need time off for cultural, spiritual commitments. You may have sick days, you may have vacation days, but you may want to think about implementing some cultural days for your Indigenous employees. So with that, I'd like to wrap things up. I know I'm right at 12 o'clock here. So if we have time for a quick question period, my colleagues Hannah and Laurel can help with the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad, for that presentation. You have so much knowledge and experience. It's always difficult to try and distill it into an hour. So you did a really great job there. I'm going to hand over to Laurel in a second, but I can see we've got some questions about whether the slides will be shared. So everyone will receive a link to this recording. And please do reach out to events@eco.ca. I'm sure, Brad, we're happy to share a PDF copy of the slides upon request if people want them. Is that okay, Brad?
I'm fine with it.
Perfect. I'm going to hand over to Laurel now. There's still time to put your questions in the chat, but Laurel's going to take us through what we've got so far.
Sure.
All right, thanks so much, Brad. Our first question here is, what advice can you give to companies who want to start developing an approach to supporting their Indigenous staff?
This is just through, again, my experiences. I would start by creating a internal Indigenous network, and that network could start your mentorship program. And that mentorship program doesn't have to be Indigenous specific, it could be very diverse. But those would be two of the first things I start with, because then you're earning that trust, building that trust, you're demonstrating your commitment through these programs. But on the other side, the Indigenous employees are going to give it their all for the success of these programs, which helps benefits your company, your organization. So I would start implementing certain programs right off the bat. Again, that would get back to your company and organization's overall Indigenous recruitment strategy. And that strategy would hopefully cover the whole life cycle, including that retention. Once you get Indigenous employees on board, how are we keeping them? How are we retaining those employees? And I think those types of initiatives help build that. And if you want to go have a further conversation off the line, I could go more in depth on that. Please feel free to email me. That was a great question.
All right, the next question here says, when recruiting Indigenous employees, is it okay to ask them what support they need? I am sometimes nervous about saying the wrong thing.
Never feel that there is no question is too small to ask. If we are not sure, ask. That's only being respectful. I would be asking, and I could speak to this because I was literally the Indigenous persons for Curl Oil Sands, for all the Indigenous communities coming to Curl. So a camp of 10,000 people, but we had a lot of youth-focused employment initiatives. So I'm taking 18-year-olds, first-time job, leaving their community, flying into a 10,000 person camp. And I was like that, first of all, Walmart greeter to help meet and greet them and to ask those exact questions. First of all, welcome to this company, this organization. If there is anything you need, know that you are not alone. I am here to support, to advise, for guidance, for friendship, whatever the needs be. And then I would ask that specific question. If you need anything, if you have anything that you require, come through me. So I would not be afraid to ask that question. And that goes for anything, if it's education, if it's a skill set, if it's support needed. ask. If we don't know, don't be afraid to ask. And if you're not being true and authentic of yourself or the company, then how can you build that relationship? So you have to ask those questions. And as long as you're sincere in asking and finding out that answer to develop those relationships, there's nothing wrong with it.
Thank you, Brad. Our next question here says, thanks for the great presentation. We would really appreciate hearing more about retention of existing staff.
Thank you. I always try to bring not only the Indigenous perspective, but to make it a well-rounded presentation. Retention is really, we talk about the Indigenous person selling themselves for their personal branding, for like their resume. How do they present themselves to get a job? Well, that retention is your company's, your organization's way to present yourself now to the community for those individuals. Those are just any of these best practices or innovative ideas that you have in place helps make you more attractive as an employer for Indigenous people. And again, please feel free to email me. I could talk to this further more in detail, but thank you for the comment about the presentation.
Right, and our next question here is they're wondering what some specific barriers are to recruiting Indigenous youth, such as high school aged youth.
Transportation. A lot of the youth don't have the drivers, if not learners at the time. So how does learner license impact a driver's license for a project, for a company? Is there insurance and risk issues there to go with it? Again, a lot of the youth are challenged with the housing conditions as well. But youth bring on a different aspect where we talk about the lack of credentials and skill sets. Youth right now is a heavy focus for receiving training and employment development skills. So how can those skill sets, if those are the entry level or we're teaching the youth these, what skill sets or what programs can an organization put in place to attract them, like as a co-op or as an internship or as a summer student, that will help continue the development of the youth? So once they do graduate or once they do complete their trainings, what positions at either an entry level or a mid-level that they could go into right away? Or if that youth could be coming out of their post-secondary with all the qualifications needed. So what skill sets, how can your programs continue to excel their personal career development? And like I said, those programs all go into that attraction of becoming a recruiter or employers of choice for Indigenous people. So yeah, hopefully that answered that.
Thank you, Brad. And it looks like we have two more questions here. So with respect to inviting elders or mentors during the interview and or onboarding, with what level of role is this recommended? I work for a small nonprofit, and this presentation seems more geared to recruiters in larger firms where there is a large range of job types. We are, on the other hand, hiring people that have prior experience and would be managing peers on multiple initiatives.
Yes, I speak to that on a higher organizational level, but the principle applies still the same to the small organizations, small companies. If you are looking to recruit, say a youth from Tsuut'ina Nation right here next door to Calgary, and you invite them for an interview, even nonprofit, you could suggest, do you have a family member, do you have an elder to come in that would like to sit with you to make you feel more comfortable so they could learn about the nonprofit organization? normally when we reach out to elders, there's elder protocol to follow. We're putting that on that individual, then the interviewee, to see if they want their family member to come. So that's their level of commitment, that to follow protocol. Now, if we're a larger organizations, we may be able to accommodate that protocol. But this fundamentally is this getting to the point in the interview process of making that interviewee feel comfortable. Do you have an existing Indigenous employee that is qualified and trained to conduct interviews? Just what I said about coming back to trust, that Indigenous interviewee will feel more comfortable seeing across the table another Indigenous interviewer representing that company or organization. If they don't see that, and this is what I'm saying, is to make that interviewees more comfortable, we could try bringing elders, family members, uncles, nephews, spouses, just someone to make them feel comfortable. So, great question. Even as a nonprofit, you could still do this, as this understanding the protocols, but really in this situation, we're putting the protocol on the interviewee to follow. They're responsible. Would you like to bring in? But again, as a company, yes, we have to conduct our interview, but we're allowing and accommodating that relationship building and storytelling time within that interview process.
And Brad, as you said before, there's no like one size fits all. It's about being open and being aware to some of these barriers and kind of letting that person kind of tell you what they need.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, and our final question here. Hi to Brad from fellow Chiospi clan member. Excellent presentation. The issue I have found is that we train our environmental monitors, environmental staff, and we work project to project. Our people stay at the entry level. We work project to project, but they never get the opportunity to actually grow with the companies we work with, although we do great work. How can we encourage large companies we work with to build their Indigenous recruitment and retention that involves longer-term employment and training for our nation?
First of all, acknowledgement to Woktaha Chiushpai. Thank you, my brother, my sister, my relation. Always glad to have a fellow Chiushpai member here. That's the extended family. So that's what I said. That's either my sister, my brother, my uncle, my grandfather, whatever it may be. My relation is with us, so thank you. Having said that, the companies have to start putting these champion programs or career development programs in place and stop this capping this career ceiling approach. We have to get beyond that. Now, if the companies are struggling or not quite aware how to do this, then we as the employee network or the entrepreneurs can develop this and bring this forward. This is our initiative through our Indigenous Employee Network. We designed this program. We're going to bring it to management for approval to get on board with this. But at some point, you are 100% correct. We need to have more champion programs and career development programs at a senior level. So.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Welcome.
Thanks, Brad. That's all the time we've got for questions today, but Brad's contact information is on the screen. And I know from working with Brad, he's very generous with his time and his advice, and he's always happy to talk to people and answer questions. So please do reach out if you want more information or a question comes to you that you want to put to Brad. And Brad, thank you again for today's presentation.
Thank you.
As we've mentioned, this is the third presentation that Brad's done for us, so all available on demand on the Eco Canada website, www.eco.ca. You can also sign up for our newsletter and check out our upcoming events, training and programs. One thing I will mention before we sign off today and hand over to and let you guys go and finish the rest of your Thursday is that we have an event coming up next week, which is our virtual career fair. It's November 25th. It's free for people to attend. We have 20 different employers from across Canada who are going to be there ready to talk to attendees, and we also have a program of free webinars. So again, all the information's on our website, and I recommend that people check it out. And it's going to be a really great event to do some networking, meet some employers, and participate in some free webinars too. Thank you everybody on the line, and thank you to Brad and Laurel for today's webinar. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks everybody.
Thanks.